Rivendell's brand new derailleur is here, almost. A complete US built bike for only $500. All that and more in today's episode of The New Hotness, still on Instagram, so you don't have to be. This episode is brought to you by Cycle Limited, your pre-owned bike shop where new bike day doesn't have to cost like new bike day. All right, so we're back. Lots of interesting stories this week. Probably the big one in terms of the alt cycling space is, of course, the new OM rear derailleur by Rivendell. We've been tracking the story for a couple years, and basically Rivendell wanted to create its own version of the Rapid Rise rear derailleur by Shimano. If you have no idea what a Rapid Rise derailleur is, what it does, how it's different, I actually made a video about 2 years ago comparing a normal derailleur and a Rapid Rise one, a little bit of the history, so definitely check that out in the links below. But Riv has been teasing this out, kind of sharing their trials and tribulations about getting a derailleur made. At one point, they'd entertained the idea of trying to do it in the US, but that would have been like a $400 rear derailleur. I think ultimately they're working with Microshift, at least that's what it sounds like through the grapevine. They've been teasing out packaging of the OM rear derailleur, as they're calling it, which stands for opposite movement. Although I think might be a clever reference to the Olympus OM1 camera as well, but just has that nice kind of aesthetic. This is a look at the instruction manual. It gives some shifting tips, how to size the chain for the rear derailleur. Evan Weiss from Bike Snob and a contributor to Outside Magazine wrote about his experience of riding with it, and it gives us our first good visual look at the rear derailleur. And I have to say, it's a nice change from the recent SRAM and Shimano releases, which have all the charm of like a VCR. Again, Rivendell is going for this more humanist, like sculpted, organic, and of course, silver look, harkening back to components of yore. This is my preference for rear derailleurs. I feel like they're timeless, and like the newer stuff that's coming out by SRAM and Shimano, they just look like cyber turds, you know, like a cyber truck came by and then dropped load and bam, derailleur. Aside from good looks, this does have certain advantages. It's built around the 9-speed cable pull, so it will work with the Rivendell friction shifters as well as older friction shifters. You don't need a large diameter friction shifter to use this. On the Rivendell page, they said it will also index to 9-speed shifters. So if you don't want to use friction and you've got some old 9-speed Shimano drifters laying about, you can do that. I also believe Sensa makes some like SRAM style, but 9-speed Shimano pull drifters. I actually have a pair, and I've been waiting for the right derailleur to build them up with, and this might be it if I can get a hold of one. Other than that, the retail price is going to be $150, so a little bit more on the, more premium end, I guess. Definitely more expensive than like a Altus or a Tourney rear derailleur, but nowhere nearly as expensive as the newer electronic rear derailleurs. Expected availability is supposed to be mid September. The things I want to know, which like no one's really talking about, is what's the capacity, what's the chain wrap, how big of a cassette can you use on the rear, how does it play, what combinations of 2 chain rings and large rear cassette can you do. Looking at the rear derailleur, other details that we can parse out is that it's got a built-in barrel adjuster, which is nice. Makes for easier adjustment if you're using road shifters and there's no inline cable adjusters in your frame. Overall, I think this is a interesting proposition where the top end of SRAM and Shimano are definitely, I wouldn't say they're abandoning mechanical shifters. Their priorities are just more on the electronic end of things. It's cool to see a new original-ish design mechanical rear derailleur put out there on the market. For me, I think this makes perfect sense. There is always going to be some aspect of bike enthusiasts, the bike community, that just wants simple silver components. Myself being one of them. I like to think of this tapping into the same zeitgeist as like the Fuji cameras. Modern insofar as they're still manufactured today, but they have classic styling and aesthetics and maybe whatever, and maybe some modern updates to them. We see this all the time in terms of music, in terms of photography. Why this kind of, I don't want to say nostalgia play, but more like classic, but more return to classic aesthetics and functionality hasn't occurred in bicycling yet. I think it's because the industry is mostly run by jocks, and they're not going to ride something like this. That want something simple, that want something that looks good and is timeless. This might be our Fuji X106. On a tangential but somewhat related note, someone in the comment section had mentioned the Nikon SP release back in 2005. And the silver derailleur kind of reminds me of this. So to catch you guys all up talking about cameras and bikes, Nikon SP was Nikon's top of the line rangefinder. I forget when the last production model was, but in the late 90s, early 2000s, everyone was going digital, and Nikon decided to do a swan song to their best mechanical rangefinder. Some would argue their best mechanical camera ever in the Nikon SP. Is a very limited edition release in 2005. I think they only made like 2,500 units. Japan only. You had to put your name in the lottery, then you'd have the opportunity to buy it. But basically, a very complicated camera to produce. The rangefinder mechanism has a ton of parts. A lot of it they had to re-engineer, recreate the dies. It was a very expensive project, and some rumors would suggest that they're selling the camera for less than it costs to actually produce, but they wanted to bring it back. I'm gonna link to this video. It's a great history of the Nikon SP and just kind of the bananas thinking back then. The reason I bring this up is I feel like there's an opportunity for this. Shimano has a great back catalog of legacy, mountain bike components that everyone loves. The silver XT stuff that worked with road shifters. I don't know if they have the tooling, the dies, or, are even able to manufacture that stuff anymore. That's what the Rivendell Derailleur is touching on to some extent. But imagine if Shimano just came out with a classic line, just call it Shimano Classic, with a nice timeless aesthetic that doesn't look like, like I said, like a VCR or a cyber turd. I think they would kill it. If they just produced it, didn't touch it, just made it available, I would be 100% behind that. But until that pipe dream happens, I doubt it's going to happen. We've at least got, the Rivendell silver rear derailleur. I'm assuming they're going to be working on their own front derailleur just because front derailleurs are becoming more scarce. So I'd be curious to see what that looks like in the future. But yeah, what do you guys think of the Rivendell silver rear derailleur? So moving on, back at Bespoke in Manchester, I had a chance conversation with the folks over at Steyr. I don't know if this conversation sparked this, but I know how one of their bikes was using a T47 bottom bracket, but they had an adapter made to run just your standard BSA. And it looks like they did a run of these T47 to BSA bottom bracket adapters. I know that there's a few that exist, like 2 or 3. So to my thinking, definitely room in the market. So why is something like this necessary? A lot of new frames are coming out using the T47 bond bracket standard, which I much prefer to like a press fit system. But the problem with that is that it rules out using certain cranks. So in particular, square taper cranks. So like the new Paul cranks could not use in a T47 frame. Other cranks are like the Spa Cycles cranks, which I talk about a lot on the channel. The Rivendell silver cranks, a lot of square taper stuff. TA crank. So if you want to use those classic components on modern frames, things like, what's a frame that uses it? Like the Blackheart. I believe some of the Fairlight bikes might use T47, I'm not sure. An adapter like this will let you use your favorite BSA only crankset on these newer T47 frames. In other interesting news, it looks like Soma got a run of the Black Snow EDC Mark II mini cargo bike. You guys know I am a huge fan of this bike. I believe they only got 5. That's what the reporting was. And they only have 1 left in stock. I'm not sure if they're going to sell this on the regular. So if you want one, literally one, there's 1 in stock. Hit the Soma store. Time for a new segment in this show, which I'm calling the New Old Hotness, brought to you by Cycle Limited, where we look at their pre-owned selection of bikes that have been looked over by mechanics, trying to find the coolest and most interesting bike that they've got. So looking at the gravel bike category, they've got a couple of bangers this week. One of them that jumps out immediately because it's almost in my size is the Mootz Route Titanium Gravel Bike, 54 centimeter. This one a little bit pricey, coming in over at 4K. But just to give you a frame of reference, I looked up the new price of Mootz Route 45, their closest equivalent, and that would set you back at least 6,000. So looking at the photos, this one's pretty tricked out. It's got a Mootz titanium seat post. It's got a color match stem. I don't know if that's titanium. I wouldn't be surprised if it. I wouldn't be surprised if it were. It looks like it's running some sort of Shimano electronic shifting. So in this case, Ultegra. There was one other bike that caught my eye that looked pretty interesting, and it is this Allied all-road gravel bike. So Allied, if you're not aware, is one of the few carbon made in the USA bike brands out there. This one is just a delightfully interesting build. You can see it's been looked over by the mechanics over at Cycle Limited. They take pictures of all the little dings and dents so you know what you're going to get. But it's built up with a mullet drivetrain. I believe this is a 4-spear derailleur, and it's got some White Industries cranks here with these kind of goldish extractor caps. This definitely feels like a bike nerd's bike, like maybe they splashed out on the frame but wanted to economize on the components, which is totally cool. I mean, this is like a build that I can get behind. This build will set you back, just over 3,000. Again, US made, carbon frame. On the small size, 49 plus, so for the short kings or short queens out there, but this color is pretty hot. So moving on to YouTube, we hear the term lost wax casting a lot in terms of manufacturing parts for bikes, but what does it mean? This has to be the best video explaining the process by our friend Daniel from Yang Manufacturing. He goes through it step by step, shows how it's applied in a modern factory, and also talks about at which point 3D printing makes more sense than having the parts cast. But a quick rundown of the process: they've got these machine dies here, which they pour wax into, which forms the shape of the part you ultimately want. But before you get to that part, they have to form another mold made out of ceramic. Then they melt out the wax, and then they pour in the steel. A very long and involved process, easily something that you can take for granted. Again, this is pure wax at this point. Then they mount it on these things called trees. All of these parts are designed so that when they eventually pour in the molten metal, form a solid part. So here they're taking the wax, they're dipping it in ceramic, or is it porcelain? I forget the material. Watch the video. And basically this creates a vessel in which you can pour the molten metal into. After it's poured, which is accurately depicted by this AI video, you're left with the metal part inside, but you have to break off the outer casing. This is what the metal part looks like, and then after that you still have to cut it off of the said trees and then do finishing work. Anyways, super interesting look at the process. There's also a great chart here where Daniel talks about the idea of amortization, where a 3D printed part can cost more in the short term. A cast part can cost less in the long term, but there is this magical line where you have to figure out if it makes sense. All that to say, you should watch this video. Super interesting. When you hear things about like cast lugs or fork crowns or yokes, they all go through this process, and it'll just give you a better sense of what's involved in creating these small parts that create a bicycle. This was an interesting article that was posted to our Discord, and it talks about the Deliveristas, so the people that do the food delivery by e-bike in New York, and how they trick out and customize their bikes. For a lot of them, it's a point of pride when they can have enough money to buy like an e-bike. They want to customize it, fly their country's colors. A lot of them do these color modifications where they wrap, I believe, like some kind of vinyl over the tubes. So here's a great quote from a delivery rider. Eddie's bike is his prized possession. We are proud of our bikes, and it is an honor for me to bear the colors of my country, Guatemala. I love this article because typically when we think of, custom bikes, they're usually, kind of bougie race bikes or even bougie alt bikes, but these are literally the working man's bike. And they still take pride in it, make it super functional, but they also make it their own. A lot of the riders decorate the bikes in the colors of the country that they're from. Many workers customize their bikes to help it stand out of the crowd, especially in crowded areas like Midtown where he works. A really interesting look at this bike subculture that we just don't hear talked about very often. Okay, hopping over to YouTube. We've been following the story for a bit. but Toxic Works Bicycle Components have created this kind of cargo rack thing, platform that attaches to your bike's frame, and it creates a platform that doesn't move as you steer. So this one bolts onto the frame in two places, one on the head tube and one on the down tube. And in this video, it gives a real practical look at the installation process in Japanese, but you can figure it out. Short version is that there are basically these two, there are these two sides that clamp on. There's some adjustability to make it level. Once you get it set up, there is a series of hose clamps that you attach to it, which then ultimately holds the platform rack. So again, the main advantage of this is as you steer, the platform stays completely stable. Might be overkill for a lot of bikes, but a pretty cool option, bringing kind of that cargo bike vibe to everyday bikes. And speaking of crazy cargo bike vibes, check out this one. This is from the folks over at Sentient Works. It is a small-wheeled, full suspension mini cargo bike. This thing looks hot. I think this is an evolution of the hot trend of mini cargo bikes that we've been talking about for the last few months. In the Instagram post, they envision it as sort of a mountain rescue vehicle. And we like to think that one day a bike like this could be utilized to assist in areas that are inaccessible by larger vehicles, to aid in search and rescue missions, provide relief for emergency first responders. See the linkages here. I think that Radavis did a article about this. One thing they did note about the build is that with the suspension and everything, it raised the bottom bracket a little bit higher than they would like by a full 3 centimeters, which is quite a big deal in terms of bike design. But again, they see this as a stepping stone bike, something to build off of, and just to see what's possible. So going back to YouTube, we're hopping over to the neutral support news, and here they take a look at a new tool by Pedro's. And what it is a bottom bracket tool. If you've ever worked on bottom brackets, you know you've got a small collection of all these. Pedro's has totally simplified the process, and instead there is one large kind of tool and then these inserts that fit around the various bottom bracket standards. It's got inserts for various SRAM and Shimano bottom bracket standards, as well as T47. It's also got this threaded rod and spring thing that will also work with tools for square taper bottom brackets. You can see this is the main piece that holds these steel tool pieces that engage with the bottom bracket shell. I think this is absolutely brilliant. Replaces just the volume that you need for each individual bottom bracket tool, and it's nice that you can have it all in one kit. Here she's demonstrating the spring-loaded thing. What this does is it ensures that you have good tool engagement. So as you apply leverage or force, you know it's not going to strip out the teeth on the bottom bracket. And again, here you can use it with a square taper bottom bracket tool, not the big socket part, but the spring part. Anyways, completely new tool to me. Would love to get a set of these and use it in the shop. Looks amazing. A great rethinking of a tool that every mechanic uses and gets frustrated about not having the right exact bottom bracket tool. So the last thing today is a really interesting one. It's from I think, fitness brand called Rogue. They have a bike called the Milo that they are blowing out at $495. And if you look at this build, it's pretty interesting. Carbon Gates drive. The wheels shown are Astral Outbacks, all that for $495. And the story gets crazier still, because apparently these bikes are built by Stinner Frameworks in Santa Barbara. So these are made in the US frames with some, US brand parts like the Astral Outbacks. Carbon Gates, all that for, $500 is just bananas. It sounded as if this project was kind of born out of the pandemic, and they might have overordered by just a lot. In our Discord, it sounds as if they've got 2,500 of these that they've committed to having built by Stinner. Not so great news for them, but awesome news for you. If you want a Stinner built made in the US bike with a carbon Gates belt drive and Astral Outback wheels. Part of me thinks that you could part this out and make a profit, but don't do that. Just buy the bike, ride it, enjoy it. If you guys enjoyed this week's new hotness, then definitely like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Check out our sponsor, Cycle Limited. And again, just a quick note, we are trying to get to the Made show in Portland. It's expensive to fly over there and pay for lodging and all that stuff. So if you guys like this video and want to see our coverage at Made, join us on Patreon, pick up some merch, and as always, keep the supple side down.